and we begin our analysis with the USC Trojans, a fascinating group to break down as you look at it, because any power rating system that takes into consideration your previous experience and bakes that in is going to be a huge negative here. I mean, this is a team that in the last 4 seasons has gone 22-21. They've won just 51.2% of their games over the last 4 seasons. They were 4-8 last season. Defensively, they were horrendous, but you've also got an entirely rebuilt roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball. A few spot players on defense. I certainly think that we'll be getting into some of those concerns for the Trojans on that side of the ball as well. Caesar Sportsbook has the over-under set at around 9 wins. The over is just sitting heavily juiced at -170. If you want to go under the 9 wins, then you might get a little value there. Plus 140 if you think it's going to be drama in the bad sense in Hollywood. In terms of the non-conference schedule, you do have the game against Notre Dame. That one is going to be at home. Outside of that, you've got Fresno State, could be challenging, and you will be playing Rice. So, Danny, throwing it to you first. How are you feeling about Lincoln Riley, USC? Are you buying the hype? What we doing with over under 9 wins?
I hate it. I think it's some of the worst value that's of the teams we're going to discuss today because of the juice that you mentioned. I'm on the over. I'm buying the hype. Not as far as some of our counterparts in media talking about the best practices they've ever seen and, just how just the rave reviews. I'm not buying it that much. I don't think they're a playoff team. But I went through it and I gave them 9 wins, I gave them 10 wins, 2 losses. But of the 10 wins, the confidence level on about 3 or 4 of them was kind of like, yeah, I think they should win. But didn't we say that same thing about them the last few years? I do think there'll be a culture shift. I do think the offense will be high powered, but where is the defense going to come from? Like, I think they're going to struggle against the more physical teams in the conference. But how many teams are going to out physical USC? And I thought the glaring ones for me were Utah on the road was a loss. Notre Dame at the end of the season at home was a loss. Those are the 2 losses. But, there's just a couple others in there where, I don't know, do I trust them at this point of the Lincoln Riley tenure to just say, yep, 10 those are the automatic 10 wins? No. But yet I don't see them as an 8-win team either. I think 9-3 is probably about where they'll be. I just don't think any value at -170 is on the over.
I'm on the under here at this price. So I think the real key thing to keep in mind is that it's -170 to the over. So that's an implied 63% break even. So which means if you're going to bet this, you need to be sure that they're going to get over that number 63% of the time. And I'm not really sure that they will. I'm not really sure they're going to go under either. I think this is probably a decent number. I have them at 8.7. So it's right around 9. But if I'm getting plus 140 to the under, I just think 8 wins is somewhat more likely than 10. I would play under 9.5 aggressively at even juice, because I think 9 is a hell of a lot more likely than 10. I think there's a good chance you actually get your money back on this and that the Trojans do go 9-3. Like when I looked at my stuff, that's the most likely outcome for me is 9-3. I don't think that their defensive transfers are all that good.
Oh,
now maybe somebody will clip this and they'll disagree. They got some good kids, but I'm not completely sold on like Shane Lee and Romello Height at linebacker. I think Eric Gentry is obviously kind of a stud. We'll see how well the guys they took from Ohio State and Colorado, and I think Blackman's probably fine. The corner they took from Colorado misses him. Covington last year really didn't play much for Washington, but I have concerns about how much you can improve this defense in just 1 year. And I have some concerns about offensive line depth. Okay. The guys they return on the offensive line are actually pretty good, I think, but I'm not totally sold on Bobby Haskins, the transfer they took from UVA. And I think they do have some real concerns about depth behind those guys. Caleb Williams and the receiving core should be dynamite, but are we also betting on Caleb Williams taking a jump? Because he flashed a lot last year. But there are also some games where he was not that good. And I think ultimately I'm very high on Caleb Williams. Are we sure this is the year he takes the step up?
Yes.
I don't know. I think probably in that offense with those receivers, it makes sense.
Yes. No, Caleb Williams takes the jump. Get the Caleb Williams Heisman price now, because I think that with the schedule, USC starts 5-1 at worst, 6-0 potentially going into that game at Utah. Like, then it does get tricky. They're like, the at Utah game is going to be tricky. The at UCLA game is going to be tricky. Notre Dame at home. 9-3 does seem very likely. But, if as we're looking at this, I think it is a little bit more depth is definitely a part of this. Can USC maintain health? Can USC maintain focus and not just slip on the banana peel here when they start to get into those tricky spots coming down the stretch? Because I think that for a first-year head coach, for a team of mercenaries, for everything that they're doing to try to rush this thing together, it kind of ramps up in a way that is advantageous to USC having a really special first season. Now, again, we're talking about a team that, baked into the program. Are you going to be able to wash all the USC off of you? Because the stench of USC is not being dominant or winning championships. The stench of USC is falling a little bit short of that, if not well short of that. And so I admit that there are spots later in that schedule that could be a little tricky. But I think that early in the season, it is set up very well for Caleb Williams to get comfortable with Jordan Addison, with Brendan Rice, with the rest of this wide receiving core. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for us to see Travis Dye really dominate or have another 1,200-yard rushing season when he's not running behind Oregon's offensive line. I think that there's a lot that needs to be ironed out, but it sets up really well. For my pick, I'm on the over. I don't see any certain losses. I think USC can win every game, but I've got them checking in a little bit closer to 9-3, 10-2. I think there's too much talent, and I've got respect for Lincoln Riley and his ability to outscore most of these. By the way, as I was breaking this down, we'll get to the Bruins in a little bit, but USC at UCLA looks like it might be so much fun. 45-42, no defense. Let's see what happens. All guns blazing. At Utah, at UCLA, Notre Dame, those were my three toss-ups. I admit Fresno State could be a little tricky, but I think that ultimately, even with Jeff Tedford back, even with Jake Haener back, it's USC. They'll figure out a way to win that game at home.
Is this like a top 10 team for you guys? Because to me, I have them inside the top 25. I don't know if I can get there with them being like a top 10 type team.
So
I heard Chip. Did I hear the playoff word come out of your mouth? Is that? I think Chip is more on them in the playoffs than you and I, bud. Because I don't think they're a top 10 roster yet.
I don't think they'll get to the college football playoff because I don't think they'll win every game. And I think coming out of the Pac-12, one loss is going to doom you. If we've got another situation where you've got Alabama, Georgia, heck, even a Texas A&M or someone out there who could be trying to snap up a college football playoff bid. So I'm not ready to put them in there.
Hold on a second. Hold on. You don't think a one-loss USC is a lock for the playoff? I think they absolutely are. Oh, I think they are. I think the branding helps. I think the Pac-12 desperately needs somebody back. I think that's the human nature aspect of it. If you had a loss to give, I think it would be on the road at Utah. And if it's a close game, I think they're in. And
then they get
the loss, much like the Big 12, So that's one of the best things about going to no divisions is you could play the team you potentially lost to and have an impressive win in there. So I think if USC is a one-loss Pac-12 team, they're a lock, assuming it's not a Fresno State or one of an early ugly loss.
Notre Dame at home could be damning at the end of the season. Notre Dame could
you can't lose that late,
right? You can't lose that last game of the season and then be able to climb your way back in. Not without some help. So that my opinion is that I think USC, if they have one loss, would still need some help to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because look, Bama, Georgia, Ohio State are way odds on to all make it, right? Because they don't play each other. Bama and Georgia don't play each other in regular season. So then you're gonna have some interesting conversations. Like one loss USC, one loss Oklahoma. Who goes? That's what I want for drama, by the way.
One loss USC, undefeated Clemson. Who goes?
Easily.
Come on, don't do the ACC like that. Clemson's
Easily
lock.
Clemson. One loss Clemson.
Twitter upset.
One loss Clemson, one loss USC.
Then it gets really interesting. Who's the team you lost to? Clemson doesn't have that Georgia, that powerhouse on the schedule outside the ACC. Then it gets really interesting.
So, and to your question, Bud, about where they sit, I actually turned in a feature for CBSSports.com today looking at mystery teams that have wide variance in the preseason polls. I've seen USC as low as 23, as high as 9, and kind of everywhere in between. So where do they sit? Not definitely in the top 10. That seems a consensus. Everyone kind of wants to put them in that 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 range. But some outlets are saying, yeah, you got to go prove it to me. We think you're barely a top 25 team. So no agreement there. I've not filled out a ballot myself. I'll probably end up with them somewhere around 12.
All right. Last, would you rather on USC? Because I know we got to get to the other ones. Would you rather play USC over 9 at -170 or USC for the division at +250, +300?
There's no
further. Excuse me for the conference.
Oh, I would rather play over 9 than for the conference.
Interesting.
At -170, I wouldn't. I'd rather get the plus value to win the conference, right?
That's my thought. Like if they're good enough to win 10 games, they're good enough to win the whole
They could win at 9-3.
And also, I remember the legendary quote from Gary Patterson. You can fool Lincoln once. If you let him get a second crack at your defense in the season, you're cooked. I'm paraphrasing like somewhere out there, but that was Gary Patterson when the Big 12 opened up the Big 12 championship game and TCU made that Big 12 championship game, and it was the defense had no chance. Lincoln had all the answers. So you could lose at Utah, but then if they did get the rematch, I would favor the Trojans. I think I agree with you guys on that one.